Don't turn me into the traitor. I'll give you my body, she begged, but the man gave her home instead.
Jake Vale hadn't spoken to anyone in 27 days. He kept track on the wall, scratched lines on a panel beside the grow chamber. Not out of habit, out of caution. When you lived alone, it was easy to forget what silence was supposed to feel like. How it got inside you. He'd been a systems architect once. Designed agricultural AI for corporate colonies across the inner rim. Efficient, calculated work, plants grown in tubes under algorithms. No soil, no wind, no mess. But things had changed after the collapse. Not a war, not a disaster, just disconnection. One by one, systems failed. Communications died. Transport stopped coming. Settlements went quiet. Now he lived in the dust. His home was a rusted prefab near the edge of the failed greenbelt. The soil had gone alkaline 3 years ago. He was still trying to reclaim it, rebalance it with ash, compost, old hydronutrients. Most days he tended the planters, kept the water filters clean, and hoped the wind didn't carry more of the rot spores from the east. That morning, he was crouched beside the root bed, trying to coax life from a cluster of limp green stems. His hands were dusty, fingernails chipped. No gloves. He'd sold the last ones for dried protein and lamp oil 2 months ago. Sweat trickled down his neck despite the cold wind. The heat on Therian. It came in waves, dry, heavy, then gone. It left behind only static and fatigue. He heard the footsteps before he saw her. Not footsteps, drags. A stagger, uneven pressure on the ground. He stood slowly, wiping his palms on his pant legs, and turned toward the ridge. A figure was coming down the slope. Barefoot, tall, thin, female. She wore what looked like ceremonial fabric, sheer, torn in places, caked in dust. The silk had once been white, maybe silver, now stained pale brown and clinging to her body in asymmetrical strips. One shoulder bare, a thigh exposed where the hem had split. Her skin had a cool, cyan tone, mottled in places from cold or bruises. Her hair was long, white, tangled, streaked with sweat and dirt. It whipped across her face as she stumbled. He didn't move toward her, just watched, hands resting at his sides. She locked eyes with him from 20 meters out. Her steps slowed. Her body swayed. She was half collapsed already. Still, she kept walking. When she reached the edge of his perimeter, her knees buckled. She dropped hard into the dirt, arms catching her weight. Breathing ragged, shoulders trembling. She raised her head and spoke with a dry, cracked voice. "Don't turn me in." Jake said nothing. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. Her lips parted again, slower this time, every word deliberate. "I'll give you my body. Just don't call them traitors, scouts, reclaimed teams." She believed she was still on their radar. He scanned the horizon. Nothing moved. Nothing buzzed. No drones. No skiffs. The woman wasn't followed. If they had dumped her, they weren't coming back. Still, he didn't move. He wasn't armed. Never had been. That was a choice. People assumed that made him vulnerable. It didn't. It made him visible only to the desperate. The ones who didn't come for blood, they came for something else. "I'm not here to trade," he said. His voice came out rougher than expected. He hadn't used it in days. She blinked, as if registering that he hadn't moved closer, hadn't lunged, hadn't lifted a weapon or even raised his voice. Jake turned, walked to the door of his cabin, and keyed it open. The hinge let out a soft metallic click. He didn't look back. He left the door open. Ayari stared at the threshold for at least 20 seconds. Her arms were trembling. Her feet were bleeding from cracked soles. Her body felt like it might come apart. Not from injury, but for being pushed too far for too long. Her mind raced. Was this a trap? Was he calling someone inside? Would he grab her once she stepped through? But the air inside the cabin didn't smell like smoke or sweat. It smelled like filtered water and steam broth. She crawled forward. Her movements were slow, methodical, each one measured to keep from falling. Her fingers gripped the frame. She pulled herself inside, body low. The door sealed behind her with a quiet pneumatic sigh. Inside was dim, warm. One solar lantern hung above the table, casting a soft, flickering cone of light. A cot sat in the corner. A row of old grow tubes lined one wall, bubbling quietly with microgreens. A water unit dripped steadily into a barrel. On the stove, a pot simmered. The smell, real soup, maybe rootstock and lentils, made her head swim. He was standing by the pot, ladled soup into a metal bowl, walked it to the table, set it down. Then he stepped back and sat down across the room. She didn't move. He didn't speak. The silence was thick, not hostile, not soft, just real. She stared at the bowl for a long time. Her body wouldn't move. Muscles refused to trust. Her brain screamed that this was the setup, kindness first, then the demand. Always the same pattern. He stayed where he was. Eventually, she forced herself up, reached with one arm, grabbed the bowl. She didn't sit at the table. She stayed on the floor, back to the wall, legs curled under her. The soup was hot, too hot. She winced on the first sip, then drank more. She didn't speak while she ate. Neither did he. When she finished, she set the bowl on the floor beside her. Her stomach was still empty, but no longer screaming. Her hands trembled from the aftershock of warmth. "I said I'd give you my body," she said. "You're not." Jake shook his head. "You're safe here." Ayari's eyes narrowed. Her voice was quieter now. "No one's ever said that without asking something after." "I won't." "Then why help me?" He paused. "Because I could not. Because the last person I didn't help was found dead by my field pump. Because people aren't salvage." He didn't say any of that. Instead, he stood, walked to a crate in the corner, picked up a folded blanket, and brought it to her. He placed it within her reach. Not over her. Not on her. "If you need sleep," he said, "it's clean." Then he walked back to his cot and sat. Ayari didn't reach for the blanket at first. Her mind still ran calculations. How quickly she could escape if needed, where the tools in the room were, how far she was from the ridge. But her arms ached. Her eyes burned. Her body was slipping toward unconsciousness, whether she liked it or not. She picked up the blanket and wrapped it tightly around herself. The room smelled faintly of old wiring, dried herbs, and earth. She closed her eyes. Jake sat in silence. He hadn't planned to let anyone in. He hadn't wanted another mouth to feed. But she wasn't just anyone. She was running, half-starved, and terrified enough to offer herself like currency. And he was too tired of watching people turn into predators to become one himself. Outside, the wind scraped across the walls of the cabin. It would keep blowing all night. Inside, the air held steady. No footsteps, no shouting, no movement. Ayari slept. And for the first time in years, Jake Vale wasn't alone. When Ayari opened her eyes, the light inside the cabin had shifted. A soft amber glow filtered through the slits in the wall paneling. Morning, or close to it. The air smelled different now. Sharper, cleaner, with hints of heated metal and sterilized soil. She lay on the floor where she had fallen asleep, still wrapped in the blanket Jake had left for her. Her legs had curled up sometime during the night, and the tightness in her spine suggested she hadn't moved much since. But nothing hurt. No bruises she didn't already have. No soreness in places that would have told her something had been taken while she slept. Her fingers tightened around the fabric. He hadn't touched her. She pushed herself up slowly, wincing as stiff joints protested. The room was quiet, except for the faint bubbling of the hydroponic tubes and a low, rhythmic chopping sound. She turned her head. Jake was at the counter. He had changed shirts. The one he wore now was dark, patched at the elbows, sleeves rolled up. He was slicing dried root vegetables on a cutting board with calm precision, the kind born from repetition and muscle memory. Not military, civilian, settler. Everything about his movement was deliberate but unthreatening. He glanced over once, saw her awake, and gave a small nod. Not a smile, just acknowledgement. She sat fully upright, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her fingers gripped it before it could fall past her chest. Her body tensed, not from fear exactly, but from uncertainty. What now? Jake finished slicing, placed the pieces into a pan, and started the burner. He didn't speak right away. That told her something. If he wanted control, he'd fill the air with instructions. If he wanted dominance, he'd ask questions. Instead, he just let her breathe. She cleared her throat. "How long was I out?" 8 hours, he replied without looking up. Didn't move once. Her eyebrows twitched. You watched me. I listen when I cook. A beat passed. That's it. Yes. She looked down at the floor, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or relieved. Where am I? She asked. What zone is this? South edge of Sector 9. Therian 8. For days past the last trade route. If anyone marked you for pickup, they're not coming here. That told her what she needed to know. She wasn't being used as bait. She hadn't been dropped here to lure anyone else. Why are you out here? She asked quietly. He stirred the pan before answering. Used to work agri-design. Corporate fields, long before the contract dried up. When the big firms pulled out, I stayed. Figured I'd try keeping something alive on my own. She tilted her head. Why? I owed someone, he said simply. Didn't pay in time. There was weight in that sentence. She didn't push. And you? Her jaw clenched. They said I was too much trouble. Too opinionated. Too difficult to train. He asked. Not a challenge. Not prying. Just a single word. She hesitated. Market recruiters. At first, they wanted women who could follow instruction. But when they realized I wouldn't be docile for long, I got moved to a different kind of inventory. Jake's hand stopped moving. The burner clicked as he turned it off. He finally looked at her directly. How did you get away? I didn't. She looked at the floor. They threw me out. Jake nodded once. Not in approval. Not in pity. Just understanding. Then he carried the pan over to the table and slid a portion onto his second metal plate. He motioned toward the chair across from him. She didn't move. You want me to sit? Only if you're hungry. She stared for another moment, then stood, moving carefully. Her legs were still unsteady, but she didn't fall. The blanket stayed around her shoulders like a robe. She sat. The chair creaked. The plate was warm under her fingertips. No questions. No demands. No rules. Just food. He ate without fanfare. No prayer. No formalities. Just silence and efficient motion. She mirrored him, slowly, uncertainly, but the food was real. She tasted salt, fiber, protein, paste mixed with chopped root. Not good, but honest. When she finished, she leaned back slightly. Her fingers tapped the edge of the plate. What do you want from me? She asked, finally directly. Jake didn't flinch. Nothing. No one wants nothing. He met her eyes. I want to work my soil. Keep my plants alive. Go to sleep without gunfire or screaming. That's all. You didn't bring me in out of kindness. No, he agreed. I brought you in because I wouldn't have been able to sleep if I didn't. She blinked. That was the closest thing to honesty she'd heard in years. She set the plate down, stood slowly, and walked to the far wall where the coat rack stood. His old utility jacket still hung there, too big for her, sleeves tattered, smell faintly like sun and oil. She wrapped it around her without asking. He didn't stop her. You can sleep on the cot tonight, he said. I'll take the floor. She hesitated. I can't pay you. I'm not asking you to. Not now. But later, Yule. I won't. Silence settled again. This one was heavier. Her fingers clenched the coat tighter. You don't know me, she said. You don't know me either. Then he walked back to the sink, rinsed the dishes in silence, and began drying them one by one. That night, she lay on the cot. Not fully asleep. Not yet, but not afraid. She listened to him move around the room, adjusting grow lamps, checking soil meters. There was no manipulation in his voice. No wandering eyes. Just a man who had drawn a boundary and kept it. She didn't trust him yet. That wasn't how her mind worked. But she didn't expect him to betray her while she slept, and for now, that was enough. Outside, the wind had shifted. Softer now, carried the smell of iron and salt. Ayari pulled the coat tighter around her and closed her eyes. For the second night in a row, she slept inside. For the first time, she didn't dream of running. By the fourth day, Ayari's hands no longer trembled when she held a spoon. Her skin, once bluish with cold and starvation, had begun to regain color, still pale but alive. Her cheeks no longer looked sunken. Her legs carried her steadily. She moved with more certainty around the cabin now, even if her eyes still tracked every gesture Jake made. She didn't speak much. Neither did he. Their silences weren't uncomfortable, just unspoken agreements. But tension still lived in the air, low, constant. Not hostile, just cautious. That morning, Jake had woken before the sun. Ayari heard him through the cabin walls, tools shifting, boots sliding across metal. She waited a moment, then rose and wrapped the coat around her. The cot smelled like him now. Not strong, just a faded scent of dry cloth, clean sweat, filtered air. She stepped outside barefoot. The sky was gray-pink again, horizon still smeared with rust-colored haze. Jake stood at the edge of the planter trench, kneeling over a disassembled water channel. Ayari watched him for a moment. His movements were slow but focused. Not once did he glance back to check if she was following. He never asked her to help, so that morning she just did. She grabbed the second spade from beside the crate and knelt in the dry soil opposite him. He didn't look up, but he slowed, eyes scanning her face briefly before returning to the work. "You know hydroponics?" he asked, tone even. "Only the old kinds," she said, from before the trade routes collapsed. "Same ones I use." She nodded once and began clearing debris from the intake valve. They worked for almost an hour in silence, moving in rhythm. Dig, scoop, align, patch. When the wind kicked up dust, she pulled the coat collar up around her face. He passed her a rag without a word. Finally, she broke the quiet. "There's something I should ask." Jake glanced up. "Go ahead. If I stayed longer, not just a few nights, what would that mean?" He wiped his hands and leaned back on his heels. "It wouldn't mean anything unless you decided it should." She studied him. "You're not worried I'll take something from you? I've already shared everything that matters. A roof, food, water." He paused. "Anything else is your choice." She looked away, not because she didn't believe him, but because she wanted to. They resumed work. Later that afternoon, inside the cabin, Jake boiled rootstock for soup again. Ayari sat across from him, slicing dried greens. She had cleaned herself that morning, used water sparingly, braided her long white hair to keep it out of her face. The silk wrap she'd arrived in was now patched with scrap fabric. She'd done it herself. It didn't cover more, not really, but it fit better now. She moved like she was beginning to inhabit her body again. "I want to do more," she said suddenly. Jake looked up. "I can't just sleep and eat. I need to work. Move. Do something real." He set the ladle down. "You already are. Not enough." Her voice wasn't desperate. It was firm. "I know how to wire mid-grade panels. I've tuned old water drones. I can clean tubes, filter brine, patch insulation. I'm not just decoration. I never said you were. But you didn't ask." He nodded slowly. Not defensive, just taking in her words. "All right," he said. "You want to earn your space?" "Yes." "Then we'll do it right. You get a task list, rotation schedule, equal food cut, and the cot stays yours." She blinked. "That's fair. You don't want charity. I don't want imbalance." That evening, she cooked for the first time. Jake let her. She moved like someone who'd watched meals made from hunger for years and now wanted to cook something with care. She didn't speak much while she worked, but she tasted the broth before seasoning it. She used dried herbs he'd stored for weeks, added chopped root, and even sliced and fermented rind from a salt pod. The result wasn't perfect, but it was good. Jake took one spoonful, then another. No words, just a brief nod across the table. Ayari looked down, but there was a flicker of something in her face. Later that night, after the tools were stored and the lamps were dimmed, Jake unrolled the mat near the stove. "You sure you're comfortable on the floor?" she asked. He raised an eyebrow. "You offering to swap?" "No," she said quickly. Then, quieter, "Just checking." He nodded once. "You earned the cot." She hesitated at the edge of the mattress. "You know I could leave. Anytime." "I know. I'm not staying because you fed me. I didn't ask you to." She stood there for a second longer, then climbed onto the cot. "Lay back," pulled the coat around her body. She watched the lantern flicker on the ceiling, the shadows shifting along the metal beams. "You're different from them," she said softly. Jake didn't ask who they were. "I was sold 3 times," she continued. "Every time, I thought maybe it would be different. Maybe the next one would just want company. Safety, not control. I got tired of hoping." His voice came quiet. "You don't have to hope here." She turned her head to look at him in the dim light. "I don't know how to relax," she whispered. "Then don't," he said. "Just rest." And for the 3rd night in a row, she did. The fear didn't vanish, but it began to loosen its grip. Jake awoke before the first light again, the way he always did. Years of early schedules hadn't left his bones even out here, where no clocks mattered. He lay still for a moment, listening. Breath. Soft. Steady. He turned his head slightly. Ayari was still asleep on the cot, curled on her side, her arms folded under the coat. Her white hair had slipped loose from the braid, strands spread over her cheek, catching faint glimmers from the overhead lamp. Her leg was half exposed through the side slit in the patched wrap she still wore. She hadn't moved much during the night. She didn't flinch in her sleep anymore. He sat up quietly, stepped over to the stove, relit the burner, and placed a pot over the heat. Routine, familiar, measured. By the time Ayari stirred, the smell of water-steamed root and ground oil seeds filled the cabin. She blinked, her eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the dim orange light filtering in from the east-facing vent slit. She sat up. No startle, no recoil, just a sigh. Jake slid a small bowl across the table without comment. She took it. They ate in silence. But this morning, the silence felt comfortable. She finished first, set the bowl aside, and stood, stretching. Her legs had gained back some strength, her steps more balanced. The jacket hung from her shoulders, but her posture had changed. No longer defensive, more self-contained. She crossed the room and picked up the panel repair kit without asking. "You want to start with the water sensors?" she asked. "Yeah. Left unit's been misfiring since the storm 2 weeks back." She nodded, pulled her hair into a loose tie, and stepped outside. Jake watched her through the open door. She didn't ask permission anymore. He joined her 10 minutes later, and for the next 2 hours, they worked side by side, clearing mineral buildup, adjusting feed ports, splicing 2 cracked relay lines. She didn't talk much. When she did, it was about the work, which is why it surprised him when she finally said, "Why aren't you afraid of me?" He didn't look up from the relay box. "Should I be? You don't know what I've done to survive." Jake set down the connector, turned to her. "I don't care what you've done," he said evenly. "I care what you do here." She held his gaze. "That's not what most men say." "I'm not most men." A pause. "You say that like it's a burden," she said, voice softer. He gave the faintest shrug. "Out here, it usually is." They finished in another hour. The hydro sensors calibrated clean, readout steady. Later, back inside, she pulled the ragged wrap from her shoulders and laid it over the chair to dry. Underneath, the patchwork tunic she'd crafted from scrap hung loosely around her hips, asymmetrical and uneven, but it was hers. She wore it with care now, not shame. She stood near the table, hands resting on the wood. "I don't want to feel grateful for not being hurt," she said. Jake looked up. "You shouldn't have to. I want to feel like I chose this." "You did," he said. "Not at first." "No," he admitted. "But every day after, you have." Silence again. She stepped closer, stopped just a few feet from him. Her voice lowered. "Then let me say it out loud now. I choose to stay." Jake's breath hitched. She didn't touch him, didn't reach, just stood there open. He stood too. "You sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure." Still, he didn't close the distance. "Not yet." "What do you want this to be?" he asked quietly. She stepped closer, now just inches from him. "Something real," she said. "Something mine." Then, slowly, her hand touched his. Not forced, not currency, just contact. And for the first time since she'd arrived, he let himself feel it. Warmth, closeness, the faint tremble in her fingers. He curled his hand gently around hers. No words, no transaction, just 2 people in a cabin under a broken sky, choosing not to be alone. The weather shifted 2 days later. Jake noticed it first in the soil, moisture levels climbing without cause. Dust stuck to his hands. The wind turned colder, less dry. On Therian 8, that meant one thing: acidic rainfall driven by static storms coming up from the salt plains. He sealed the grow tubes, covered the trench beds, and reinforced the roof hatch with a spare insulation sheet. Ayari helped, moving with speed and precision. She knew storms like this, had crossed them once on foot, nearly lost her eyesight to chemical glare. She didn't need to be told twice to double seal the door edges. By late afternoon, the first drops began to fall, thick, oily, streaked with yellow. They stayed inside. The cabin felt smaller in the storm. Not claustrophobic, just closer. They passed time organizing tools, patching old clothing, boiling clean water, and wiping condensation from the inner walls. At one point, the wind howled so loud the doorframe shook. Ayari flinched. Jake stepped beside her, just close enough to remind her where she was. But the walls would hold. That night, when they lay in their separate corners, he on the floor, she on the cot, neither spoke at first. Just listened to the rain smacking metal and the low groan of wind-blasted panels. But eventually, Ayari spoke. "Do you ever get tired of being good?" He turned his head on the mat. "What do you mean?" She was facing the ceiling. Her fingers clutched the coat tighter around her torso. "You treat me like I'm human. You didn't even know me. Most wouldn't. They wouldn't ask. Wouldn't care. But you do. Doesn't make me good," he said. "What then?" "I just don't want to become like the people I ran from." That answer sat in the room for a while. She turned her head toward him. "What happened before this?" "Before here?" He didn't answer immediately. "Then, I worked for a colony grid in the inner systems. I built systems to feed people, but the food never made it to the bottom levels. Just to the licensed ones. Families in the lower rows starved while top brass stored excess protein in locked chambers. I knew. I saw the logs. I didn't stop it. You tried." He shook his head. I obeyed. She didn't ask anything else. They sat with that silence. It was honest. In the days that followed, the storm finally passed. The air outside still smelled of burnt iron, but the light returned. Jake uncovered the planters. Ayari harvested 3 units of tube root without instruction. She'd memorized the process. That night, she didn't sleep on the cot. She lay beside him, not an invitation, in quiet solidarity. 2 forms under a single old blanket. She didn't ask permission. He didn't resist. And in that wordless hour between night and sleep, their arms found each other. Not in hunger, not in desperation, just presence. Quiet, shared weight. He could feel her heartbeat through the thin shirt she wore. Fast, nervous, steadying. Her breath warmed his collarbone. She whispered against his skin, "No one's ever held me without owning me." Jake didn't reply. He just held her tighter. Neither of them needed words anymore. The rhythm of the days changed after that. Not suddenly, but quietly, like a room warming from a fire someone forgot they lit. They woke side by side now. Sometimes tangled, sometimes not, but never apart. Ayari didn't ask for permission when she reached across his chest. Jake didn't pull away when her hand stayed there as morning light leaked in through the vent slits. There was still no talk of what it meant. They didn't define it. They just lived it. She took over the planter maintenance without being told, replaced a broken valve filter, cleaned the soil traps, even adjusted the light spectrum by climbing the roof and tuning the external panel herself. Arms stretched over corroded piping, wind cutting through her shirt, skin streaked with dust and sun. He watched her from below. She looked alive up there. And every night, they came back to the cabin, ate together, cleaned together, and when the work was done, they sat close. Her fingers curled around the back of his hand. His chin tucked gently against her shoulder when the wind howled outside. But healing wasn't linear. It never was. That became clear the morning she dropped the tin cup on the floor. It wasn't loud. It just clattered. She froze. Her breathing changed, sharper, shallow. Jake had seen it before in others. Trauma didn't need volume. Sometimes a sound, a motion, a shadow was enough. He moved slowly, not toward her, just to the counter, poured fresh water, set it down beside her, and backed away. She didn't drink it, not immediately. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the cup. She looked at him, eyes alert, haunted, waiting for something she had seen in others. Anger, punishment, control. She got none. Jake just stood still, offering space. "Thank you," she said quietly. Voice strained, barely audible. He nodded once. No rush. They didn't talk about it that day. She returned to work, quiet but present. By nightfall, her fingers found his again. But her grip lingered longer this time, as if needing to confirm something wasn't gone. 3 days later, she brought it up. They were planting new seedlings under one of the repaired domes when she finally said it, hands buried in soil. "When I was first sold, They called it a placement. Said I'd be helping. Said I'd earn credits. I believed them. Jake didn't interrupt. She kept going. They took my name, made me wear collars, gave me a number. She glanced at him as if checking for disgust. She didn't see it. I broke a plate once. Not on purpose. It just slipped. Like this morning. I got locked in a heat chamber for 8 hours. That's what I thought would happen when I dropped your cup. He swallowed hard. You won't be punished here. I'm still waiting to believe that, she admitted. But I want to. That night, as they lay together, she didn't just curl beside him. She pressed her forehead against his chest. I want you to touch me, she said. But not because you think you've earned it. And not because I owe it. Jake didn't move. Not right away. He wanted to be sure. Her voice stayed steady. I want it because I choose it. For the first time, I want to choose. When his lips finally touched hers, it wasn't fast or hungry. It was cautious, honest. Their clothes didn't fall away like in the stories. They came off piece by piece, with pauses, questions, silent affirmations. And when they finally lay skin against skin, she didn't flinch. She breathed. He held her afterward, not as reward, not as conquest, but as agreement. And sometime in that silence, she whispered into his chest, I'm not afraid anymore. He kissed her hair. You never had to be. The sky over Therion, H shifted again. Not with a storm, not with danger, with color. Soft orange replaced the dead pink haze. The dust winds settled for the first time in weeks. Morning light filtered through the cracked polyglass window with a clarity neither of them had seen in months. The air didn't smell like rust anymore. It smelled faintly like dry grass and heated stone. Inside the cabin, Ayari stood barefoot near the stove, stirring a pot slowly, her white hair braided and tied back. The patched tunic she'd built from old fabric hung comfortably on her now. Clean, close-fitting, layered over thin leggings she'd found and repaired. She moved with certainty, not caution. Jake sat at the table, working through a rewire schematic for the failed roof heat array. One hand held a soldering tool. The other reached for his cup without looking. Ayari handed it to him before he could. She smiled faintly. He set down the tool. Thanks. She looked at him seriously for a moment. Can I ask you something? You can always ask. If you had never opened that door, that first night, would you have regretted it? He met her eyes. I'd still hear your voice in my sleep. She nodded once and returned to stirring. There were no more questions. Not about whether she was staying. Not about what either of them owed. There was nothing transactional between them now. That afternoon, they walked the perimeter together, inspecting the sealed cracks in the outer fence, double-checking the condenser tanks, checking for signs of corrosion in the pipes. Ayari spotted a small vine pushing up through a crack in the dry earth. Do we pull it? She asked. Jake crouched. Look closely. No, it's not invasive. Let it grow. She knelt beside him. Then maybe it's a sign. Of what? Something survived. Later, they repair the last roof panel. She stood on the ladder, arms overhead, sleeves rolled, sun casting a glow across her shoulders and neck. Jake handed her each bolt, each tool, one by one, silently, like a dance they'd learned through repetition. When the panel clicked into place, she climbed down and pressed her forehead gently against his chest. I'm home now, she said. He held her, not protectively, but equally. That night, they lay together in the cot, his mattress long since given up, the cot now made for two. The cabin around them was the same, patched walls, dented furniture, a sputtering stove. But it felt like something else. Not a shelter, a life. Ayari traced her fingers across his chest slowly. I was never supposed to matter. Not in any of the places I was before. But here I do. You always did, he said. You just needed somewhere to remember it. Outside, the wind whispered low against the metal siding, but the sky stayed calm. No more running. No more bargaining. No more fear. She kissed his shoulder once, softly, and closed her eyes. He kept his hand over her hip, anchoring her to the moment. And for the first time on Therion, nothing had to be earned. They had already chosen each other, and they would wake up together again tomorrow. Days passed, then weeks. The landscape around the cabin changed, not from the planet itself, but from how they lived within it. Jake and Ayari no longer spoke about staying or surviving. Those words no longer applied. They planted new seedlings together, organized storage shelves, insulated the northern wall before the next temperature drop. The cabin felt lived in now, not temporary. There were 2 pairs of boots by the door. Her tools, labeled and clean, sat beside his. A loose braid of her white hair hung from a nail beside the grow log, a little joke between them. They laughed sometimes now. Not often, but enough. Some mornings, they bathed together using filtered water they heated manually. She would scrub the grit from his shoulders. He would dry her feet one by one. It wasn't indulgent. It was care without urgency. One afternoon, under a pale yellow sun, Ayari returned from scavenging for scrap cloth and stopped at the edge of the ridge. She stared at the valley where she'd first collapsed weeks ago. The wind shifted her hair gently across her collarbone. She didn't speak for a long time. When Jake came up behind her, he didn't ask what she was thinking. "I used to believe I was ruined," she said. "That if someone wanted me, it was because they saw something broken, something cheap." He said nothing, just stood beside her, his hand gently brushing hers. "I don't feel that here," she said. "You never were any of those things," he replied. That night, they didn't undress in silence. There was no tension, no shame, no need to prove or justify, just presence. She removed her tunic slowly, piece by piece, folding it as she went. Not rushed, not shy. She stood before him with calm confidence. Her body was full, scarred in places, curved and solid. He didn't touch her immediately. He looked, carefully, not consuming her, but witnessing her. "You still want me?" she asked, quiet but steady. He stepped closer, slid his hand gently along her waist, then further down, until it rested at her lower back. "I've never stopped." She unbuttoned his shirt next, one loop at a time, pushed it from his shoulders. Her hands traced his chest, the faint hair, the scar under his ribs from years ago he'd never spoken about. She kissed it gently. They moved to the cot. It creaked under their weight, but they didn't laugh this time. Their limbs found each other deliberately, her thighs sliding over his hip, his hand cupping the back of her neck as she lowered herself against him. Their mouths met, slow at first, then deeper, her breath catching in his as their hips aligned. He didn't guide her. She led. Her rhythm was unhurried. Each movement forward purposeful, intentional. She wanted to feel every inch of him, not in a rush to climax, but to connect, physically wholly. Her body pressed into his with trust she'd never given anyone. Not like this. He traced his hands down her back as she moved, every line of her soft, real skin familiar now. She gasped once as he shifted slightly upward, catching deeper. Her hands clenched against his shoulders. But she didn't stop. She whispered his name once, not for attention, but for anchor. He responded by lifting her with one arm around her waist and rolling her gently beneath him. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in wonder. His mouth traced the slope of her breast, her collarbone, the line between her ribs. When he entered her again, slower this time, she arched, not to resist, but to receive. Their pace changed. Fingers intertwined, breath mingled. When she came, it wasn't sharp or loud. It was full body. A soft exhale, a shudder, and her nails dug in his back, not to hurt, but to hold him there. He didn't rush to finish. He followed after, pressing deeply into her, then holding, groaning softly in her neck. They stayed connected long after the rhythm ended. He didn't pull away. She stroked his hair, chest rising and falling under him. After some time, they separated only slightly, her legs still across his hip, their hands still linked between them. "Are we a we?" she asked quietly. "We always were," he said. Outside, the wind shifted again, but inside, the air stayed still. The lights dimmed. The warmth remained, and nothing was owed. Nothing was taken. It was theirs. All of it.